In this video we are going to understand what is MCP Inspector, how we can make use of MCP Inspector, and we will also see what all the different modes that are offered by the MCP Inspector. So I have opened the official GitHub page of MCP Inspector, wherein the entire information related to MCP Inspector is listed. So we will quickly start we will start with what is MCP Inspector. So you can think of MCP Inspector as a tool using which we can test or debug the MCP servers that we have developed. So basically how we can launch this MCP Inspector. Prior to this, we need to make sure that we have the Node.js installed in our system and the version should be 22.7.5 or higher. And in order to check which version of Node.js you are currently using, you can execute this command. So in order to launch the MCP Inspector, the command that we have to give is the npx, which is node package execute, and the name of the tool, which in our case which is MCP Inspector that we want to launch. So I'll execute this command, and here you will see it will launch on the port 6274. So you will copy this URL and paste it inside the browser. So basically we are launching the MCP Inspector in the GUI mode, and on the very left hand side you can see we can specify the commands and arguments that are needed to start and test the MCP server. So let's take one example of file system MCP server, which is basically useful for performing the file related operation on our local system. So this is the MCP server that we are making use of, and in order to launch this MCP server we need to specify the command as well as argument. So command is node package execute, we will specify it here, and the arguments that are needed to launch our MCP server, file system MCP server. So in this case it is the server hyphen file system, and here we are specifying the directories with which our file system MCP server can interact. So we are providing very limited access to it, which is we are only allowing to perform the MCP file system operation within this particular directory only, which is MCP demo. So I'll copy these arguments and paste it inside the argument section, and I'll click on connect. So when I click on connect, here we are seeing some message what all the allowed directories, and we can see the status as connected. And on the top you can see we have different tabs like resources, prompts, ping, tools, and sampling. So ping is used to check whether our server is healthy or not. You can think of it as a health check endpoint. Inside the tools tab we can see what all the functionalities or capabilities that are exposed by the file system MCP server, and at the bottom we have the history section wherein all the interactions that we have done with our MCP server will be listed here. So this is how we can launch the MCP Inspector. Now one thing to note here is now what we did was we just launched the MCP Inspector and then provided the configuration manually by entering those information within the GUI, but we can do all this with the help of one single command, which is where this second syntax comes into the picture, wherein we can launch the MCP Inspector. Along with it we can specify the command and the arguments and the server that we want to launch. In our case the argument will be node package execute. We want to launch the file system MCP server, and we need to specify the arguments that are expected by this file system MCP server, which in our case is the directories which we want to allow. So I'll copy this command. First I'll terminate this. So I'm pasting this syntax wherein npx we want to launch inspector and we want to launch our file system MCP server. So again it will launch on port 6274. When we go to the browser and paste this URL, and when we click on connect, here you can see all the configuration is already pre-populated because we specified it while launching the MCP inspector. So now coming to the functionalities, how we can test the capabilities that are offered by the MCP server. So in our case, we will go to tools, and when we click on list tools, it will list down all the capabilities that are offered by this particular MCP server. For example, we can read the file content, we can edit the file, we can list the directories, or we can list all the allowed directories. So I'll execute this command. So when I click on this particular capability, on the right hand side you can see we are getting an option to run this tool. So it will run the list allowed directories capability. Here you can see in our case, since we provided the access to only one of the directory, so it is showing as allowed directories as MCP demo. And when we click on history, here you can see we executed the list allowed directory capability, and the response that we received from that was this particular text that we are seeing on right. So coming now, we will try to execute one more capability wherein we can check whether that functionality is working as expected or not. We will read the file content. So since we have provided the access to this particular repo, which is MCP demo, I have kept one file inside the nested folder. Here you can see the path as users bunty MCP demo. Inside test folder 1, I have kept one text file which is test-file.txt. so I'll provide the path of this test folder 1 slash test file.txt, test file.txt. so when I click on this to run tool, here we are seeing the file content which was present inside the test file.txt. And also in the history section you will see that we have executed this capability read file, and the input that we provided was the file path, the file that we want to read, and what response that we got from the file system MCP server. So this was the basic example wherein how we can run the MCP server along with the arguments that are expected by our MCP server. Now if your MCP server is expecting some environment variables, there is a way using which we can pass those environment variables. So first one is using the -e flag. So the rest of the syntax will remain the same, and we can specify the environment variables with the help of this flag, which is -e. Then we can specify the key value pair. Now in order to showcase this example, I will take the example of another MCP server. This is the MCP server that we have developed using Java Spring AI. What we have done is we have created the Mongo MCP server, and in order to establish the connection with Mongo, we are expecting two environment variables, host and the port, to which so host will be localhost, which will connect to the Mongo server which is running on our local, and the port will be 27017. So I'll copy this command. Here you can see we are specifying the environment variables, and we are specifying the command as Java since it is developed using Java, and the arguments will be -jar and the path where the jar is present. So it is present inside the MCP demo, and then MCP server is the name of the MCP server is this Spring Boot AI Mongo MCP server, along with the .jar, which is the file extension. So when I start this MCP inspector, again we can interact with our MCP server using same. So here you can see the command is pre-populated, the arguments are pre-populated, and the environment variables that we specified like Mongo host and Mongo port are also pre-populated, and if required we can add the more environment variables if those are needed. So when I click on connect, here you can see it is the status is showing as connected. When I click on list tools, it will provide the list of capabilities that are provided by our Spring AI Mongo MCP server. So we will quickly execute two functionalities like list databases, which will list all the databases in our MongoDB server. So here you can see the list is printed, and if we check the history, we can check the which we can check the request and response, like we executed this capability list databases and what response that we got. Now I'll execute the second capability, wherein we can see what all collections that are present inside a specific database. So in our case I am checking it for e-commerce database, and here you can see the name of the collection is orders, and if we click on history, we can see the request and response that we got. So this was all regarding the GUI mode. Now MCP Inspector also provides us one additional mode wherein we can launch the MCP server using the command line interface. Basically this mode is useful if you are writing some script, or if you are automating few things within your CI/CD pipeline. This is how you can make use of the CLI mode, wherein you can write your test cases and directly integrate it within the CI/CD pipeline. So in order to launch the MCP Inspector in CLI mode, all we have to do is we have to specify one additional flag, which is --CLI, and we want to specify what operation we want to perform. So here you can see we are specifying the operation as tools/list. Before specifying the operation, we need to add one flag, which is the method --method. So what it will do, it will list down all the capabilities that are exposed by a particular MCP server. In our case it will be file system MCP server. So here I am copying this command, which is node package execute. We want to launch the MCP Inspector in the CLI mode, and we want to launch the file system MCP server. We are providing the access to the MCP demo directory, and the operation that we want to perform is the tools/list. So here you will see it has listed down all the capabilities that are exposed by the file system MCP server, like search files, list directories, and so on, list allowed directories. Now we can also execute a particular capability using the CLI mode only. So what we have to do is we need to specify what operation we want to perform. We want to call a particular tool, and which tool we want to call. Let's say we want to call a read file capability, so we need to specify the --tool name. The operation will be read file, and there are certain inputs that are expected by the read file operation, which will be the name of the file along with the path that you want to read. So we can specify it using --tool argument, and it is expecting the path, wherein we are specifying the path where this particular file is present, testfile.txt. So I am copying this command, and when I click on execute, it will give us the file content, just like the same that we seen on in case of the GUI mode. So this was regarding the CLI mode. There is one more thing. Now while launching the MCP Inspector, we were specifying the arguments, or we can say the command, all using the terminal. So let's say we have the config.json file. If we are working with multiple server, we can create one config.json file, wherein we can specify the configuration related to the MCP servers, and what all arguments or environment variables that are expected by those particular MCP servers. So here you can see we have the config.json, wherein we are specifying the MCP server configuration. First MCP server is file system, second one is the Spring AI Mongo MCP server. In order to launch the file system MCP server, the command is node package execute, and these are the arguments that are expected by the file system MCP server. Similarly, for Mongo MCP server, these are the arguments and the environment variables that are expected by the Spring Mongo MCP server. So once the config.json file is present, we can specify it using the --- config flag. So here you can see we are specifying node package execute MCP Inspector --- config, where this particular config.json file is present, and what MCP server you want to test, that can be specified with the help of --- server and the name of the MCP server. So here you can see for file system MCP server, the name is all small case file system. So while running this command, we need to specify the same name here. So when I click on this and execute, it will launch the MCP Inspector, and we can access the same using the steps that we had seen earlier. So here you can see the all operations we can do, like the one we have seen earlier. Yeah, so that was all regarding the MCP Inspector. Also, we have written one detailed blog related to it, wherein we have covered each and every section in much detail, including what is the difference between GUI mode versus the CLI mode, and the examples that we have seen are like the file system MCP server. This is the URL, and also if you are interested in knowing more about the Spring Mongo MCP server, this is the URL. So that was all regarding the MCP Inspector. I hope this information was useful. So thank you.